Okay, so that's sort of the story from the top of the hierarchy. If we can go now to people who would be in a follower role, or what's the advice in that role? You feel a little tamped down, but there's an opportunity with someone new. You're unhappy, but what's your advice? And you're going for organizational effectiveness still.
Right.
Okay.
So the general advice to people in quote-unquote low-power positions about how to communicate what their experience is and or to promote some sort of change that they believe would help do the job better. The general advice is you need to actually come together as a group. So that you need a friend, you need 3 or 4 other people. Individually, the person who you go to talk to, let's say you had courage, you were one person with courage, the person in the leadership role doesn't know how to evaluate that information. It's just coming from one person. It could be one person's perspective, and genuinely, the person doesn't know how to weight if there are 12 people in the insurance. They don't know how to weight the one person coming. They could collect some data, and many organizations do. That is, they use somebody coming or something written anonymously to collect data about how widespread that thought or feeling is so as to decide whether action needs to be taken on it to improve the organization effectiveness. But the other thing you can do is you can do that organization in the low power position. It makes a big difference to someone in a position of authority if 6 people come and say, hey, we've been thinking about this and we want to tell you what we think about the way in which things are done now. We're proposing is much more effective in terms of the person at the top of the hierarchy listening to the thoughts and feelings. So generally, my advice to people at the bottom is you have to sort of see whether you're the only one who's got this thought or feeling, and if there are more people, you have to try to get all of the people to come together to express it. And my advice to a person in a leadership role is to not think of this as an assault, but rather as a way of collecting data for you. If I'm in the authority role and a group comes to me and says, here's what we think, my question is, are there variations in that thought? So I'm interested in what they're mainly trying to tell me and whether there are any differences in there, whether there's some effect for the group that's causing them to all speak with one voice, when in fact they have different thoughts and feelings about it, which would help me understand the situation better.
So I'm going to put you in a harder situation, and this would be in a low-power group. Let's say it's all of the nursing and technical staff that are in the OR, and there are just issues with the way the surgeons and the anesthesiologists are running the OR that make it really difficult to be effective. That is, save all patients, no infections, complications, et cetera. And they do all feel alike. But the last history when they've brought this up, it's been sort of, yeah, got that, nothing we can do, move on. You know, they've been sort of dismissed when they've brought this. How does a person in that role or a group in that role really make a decision about whether I should just keep trying on this? Or what advice can we give? How do people who are in a followership role actually lead in that way?
So there's an interesting book, which, as you know, is about economics, but it speaks to essentially this question. And the title of the book is very instructive in some ways. The title of the book is Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. And it essentially says that in order to create learning systems, that people who are participating in that system, employees, have basically 3 options when something is not going right. And these options are framed in terms of actually how to make the organization more effective. One of them is to leave. Because by leaving, you are taking your skill and your ability and you're saying, this is not a place that I want to contribute my skill to because it's hurting patients or it's not helping them as much as they can. This is an extreme action. We all know examples where we're glad people did that because it woke up an organization to a negative thought and feeling and caused it to make some changes. It was not terribly easy. We don't hear from these people very often afterwards because it's tremendously costly for the individual who does it. The second thing was voice, which is the notion that you have to find some way to express what it is that you're struggling with and are critiquing about the organization. And this is, as your question suggests, is very difficult to do. And sometimes it's translated into exit because of the frustration that voice is not being heard. Now, the guy who wrote the book, Albert Hirschman, made the case that we in organizations should prefer to have people express their critique, the saying what they think and feel, because it contains information for the organization to adjust to its task, et cetera. That we should do whatever we can to keep people from leaving, because when they leave, they take with them their information, which might help make the organization better. And my interpretation is this is what he meant by loyalty. That is, we need to define loyalty as giving voice to what we're thinking and feeling about the task that's in front of us, not define loyalty as getting with the program. And so I think my advice to the low power people would be, you might have to leave, or you might have to say to your supervisor, I don't want to be in that OR anymore.
Yep.
And then you're putting pressure on the organization to say, why not? Or reassign you, right? And then pretty soon that creates some information in the system about why are people leaving this person's OR, what's going on in that OR, and then we turn our attention to it.
But you've just cast loyalty as a very positive thing that allows voice also. So I just wondered if you could run over that again, because I think it's a very interesting. Should we be training our followers to be loyal, and what does that really mean?
So it's a great question, and I would come at it in two ways. What I said before was we need to convey that loyalty includes one's critique of the organization. Loyalty traditionally, in blind loyalty, means it doesn't matter what you are thinking and feeling. You do what you are told to do by the organization.
Right.
And I was recasting that what we need to do in organizations, actually, I think this is what Hirschman was saying, is we need to recast loyalty as not blindly saying only positive thoughts about the organization, but rather loyalty is saying what you actually think and feel about what we're doing. It keeps you from going off the cliff because you can depend on people saying, I think there's a cliff out there. And you can't see it because you're sitting in a bottom seat and I'm sitting in a top seat, and I can see where the cliff is and you can't, and I need to tell you that it's there. So that's one thing. The other piece about way of thinking about loyalty is it's loyalty to a task and a mission rather than to an individual. And the question there always is, what is the primary task of this organization, and does this contribute to it? I may not always know whether it does or not, but if I'm thinking that something you've asked me to do does not contribute to the central task of this organization, then I'm obliged to say it in my definition of effectiveness. I may have information from others who say their perspective that may change the way I think about it. But my job, take a hospital, doc prescribes a certain number of milligrams of a drug, and the nurse says, I think he's multiplied this by a factor of 10. Not necessarily on purpose, but
hopefully not on purpose.
What's my loyalty?
Yeah.
To follow the orders, or to say, Doc, could you check the book on this? Because my reading, what I was trained is that this is a lot more than, to which the doc might say, oh, of course, right? It's 25, not 250. Or the doc might say, just do what I tell you to do, in which case there have been examples of what the nurse says is, well, you'll have to get somebody else to do that because I believe this is dangerous to the patient, and my job here is to take care of patients. I think that's what our task is as a hospital. Now, this is very hard to do. So to go back to your question about individual courage, I think the nurse is more likely to do that if the training of nurses, if the nursing supervisor has said the definition of loyalty is saying what you think and feel. You will not be punished for it. You will be promoted for it. Easier for anybody to do that than if none of that's been said, or if the nurse manager says, you do whatever the doc tells you. I don't care whether it's to give it 10 times the dosage. We're not going to get in a position of taking on the docs here. That's not our job.